Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Kaiya. Today we are going to be ranking all of the Cannibal Corpse albums. This is following the Cannibal Corpse Part 2 video that I just posted, which is a two-part series talking about the entire history of Cannibal Corpse, diving into everything, including all of their albums, the history of the band, and I also show off basically every single vinyl of that band except for one. So I highly encourage you to go and check out that series. I worked so freaking hard on it. Not even like, I'll toot my own damn horn, girl. That video, both of those videos took me a very long time to do, but it was awesome to be able to dive into that band and actually listen to every single one of their albums and formulate my own opinion, and that's why I'm doing this tier list today. They're gonna be a little controversial, okay? Because
that's just how I am.
It's fun to see where Cannibal Corpse fans place their albums, what they think is like the best album, what they think is the worst album. So, yeah, without further ado, let's just get started with the tier list. If you like today's video, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, and also check out my Patreon. Check out my Patreon, girl, okay? I got tons of exclusive content. Right now I'm doing an entire series watching the Metalocalypse show for the first time ever. We do tons and tons of exclusive reactions. All of my copyrighted reactions go over there. So peek at it if you want. Let's get into the video. So of course, let's get into the very first record, which is Eaten Back to Life. This is Cannibal Corpse's debut album from 1990, featuring Chris Cookie Monster Barnes. This is a very solid debut album. I think that it is an absolutely perfect introduction for Cannibal Corpse. It's a perfect introduction to get us a look at New York style death metal. It's a good solid debut. I think Chris Barnes sounds great, and it's got solid tracks on here. Do I think it's their best album? No, but that's okay. You want your debut to be solid enough and your other albums to surpass that debut, and that's what they successfully did. So for Eaten Back to Life, I'm going to say that album is solid B tier. I don't think it's their strongest, but it's of course very solid. Then we get into Butchered at Birth, and ladies and gentlemen, I think that this is my favorite Chris Barnes era vinyl. Honestly, I absolutely love this record. Butchered at Birth is pinched fingies. I think this is quintessential New York style death metal with Chris Barnes on vocals. They did exactly like I explained with Eaten Back to Life. They surpassed their debut album with Butchered at Birth. I mean, everything from the album art to the actual songs on here are just amazing. Butchered at Birth, you're a winner. You are absolutely a winner. But I am going to say it's not S tier for me. So, Butchered at Birth, this is you. I did grab the censored covers, just so you know, so we can make
Bored YouTube happy. You're welcome.
Here we are. Yes, another week.
Tomb of the Mutilated from 1992. I think that this is honestly one of the more underrated. I mean, I say underrated. I think a lot of people really like Tomb of the Mutilated, but I mean, let's be honest. Everybody's favorite Chris Barnes album, bar none, most people say The Bleeding. So I think Tomb of the Mutilated, but especially Eaten Back to Life, are extremely underrated. This is such an extremely aggressive album. It's still got that New York death metal sound, but it's like Butchered at Birth, but times 10 on steroids. It is way more aggressive. It's just way more unforgiving, and you have some of the best bangers on this album. Of course, Ace Ventura feature, right? I mean, Hammer Smash Face, the Vaginal Skin, Entrails Ripped from a Virgin. Like, girl, Tomb of the Mutilated, you're still a banger, and you're still gonna go in A tier. So now I honestly just have to find the vinyl cover. Do I not have it in here? I don't have it in here. 1, 2. Oh, well. All right, well, I picked Tomb of the Mutilated. I picked Tomb of the Mutilated's thing for Butchered at Birth, and Butchered at Birth is now on there. So this is the censored cover for Butchered at Birth, which they also have a red and yeah, it's like a red background one, and then this is the white background with red lettering, which is really cool. All right, let's just get it over with. The Bleeding from 1994. Like I said, this is about like 80% of Cannibal Corpse's favorite album, like across the board, just from polls and questionnaires that I've done on my channel. Obviously, everybody's entitled to their own opinion. Now, The Bleeding, bestie, I have some thoughts on this album. Personally, for me, and y'all are probably gonna get upset by this, I'm not a fan of this album. I don't think it's their strongest for Barnes, and I certainly don't think it's the strongest in their entire discography. Even the bandmates have said this is the most difficult album that they have recorded, bar none. There were so many fights and so much tension. You know, it's just absolutely brutal. It's not the original New York death metal sound that I enjoy from Cannibal Corpse. You can hear it. At least I can hear it. I can hear that Scott Burns had to compensate so much for there being so much tension between the members of the band. They were just not bringing it their all. They were not bringing the normal Cannibal Corpse energy that we are really familiar with and what we got to see with projects like Tomb of the Mutilated and Butchered at Birth. So for me personally, The Bleeding is not a flop, but she's not the best. She is not the best, and honestly, we might be putting it in C tier. We might be putting it in C tier. Because I honestly think this album is so much like that Florida death metal that I do love, but it's not Cannibal Corpse's sound. At least at the time of its release, it's not. That's not Cannibal Corpse. The Bleeding is mimicking Floridian death metal, and that's because of Scott Burns' influence. So go ahead and, dislike the video now, now if you want. So Vile, let's talk about Vile, girl. We're just gonna move right on. 1996, first album with Corpse Grinder. The man, the myth, the neck, the legend. Vile, just like Eaten Back to Life, is a very, very solid debut. I kind of consider Vile as Cannibal Corpse's second debut album in a way. It's a very solid introduction into who Corpse Grinder is as the vocalist. Devoured by Vermin also, bestie, that is one of the best ways to open up your death metal song. When Corpse Grinder was talking about that scream in my video, I was so excited to freaking listen to it afterwards, and it is so good. But they have better albums. So, Vile, not only do I also love, like I've said in that video, the face of the gentleman on their cover, but I love the instrumentals. So, Vile, you're going to go right up with Eaten Back to Life for just being a solid debut. I think it's a solid debut for Corpse Grinder. So let's jump into Gallery. This is the second album, of course, with Corpse Grinder on vocals. Like I mentioned with Butchered at Birth, you want this next album to keep up the intensity, and because I'm kind of considering Vile as being their second debut, Gallery is their second album, but with Corpse Grinder. So this album, I think, is relatively solid. I think it's pretty good, but it does have some filler. Now, a lot of y'all said this was one of your favorite albums. You thought that it was just a banger through and through. I respect your opinion. I think it's got some filler, and that is why I don't think it's their strongest album in their discography or the strongest album for Corpse Grinder as a whole. I mean, it's not only really, really long, which I do think hurts it a little bit, but there were some songs, like I said, Crushing the Despise, Headless, and either Every Broken Bone or Centuries of Torment, we didn't need to have. We literally didn't need to have those. That's like 3 or 4 songs that are filler. So as far as Miss Gallery goes, she's all right. I think she's right there with the bleeding, you know. I think that she's still, you know, she's true and genuine to the, you know, New York style death metal sound. I just think that there's a little bit more filler. All right. Everybody needs to calm down. We're going to talk about Bloodthirst. Bloodthirst from 1999. This freaking album, guys, is such a banger. Some people were saying that it is underrated, and I don't know if it's considered underrated. Because across the board, at least on Cannibal Corpse Reddit, Death Metal Reddit, a lot of people said that Bloodthirst was one of their favorite Corpse Grinder albums. So I had really high expectations going into this record, and I will say this album slaps. It is absolutely like Tomb of the Mutilated 2.0. It's aggressive, it's punchy, it is relentless, and it's just a banger through and through. And I think the reason why Bloodthirst is such a banger, and personally so much better than Gallery, is because it's shorter. It's 10 minutes shorter. It's filled with bangers, and less filler. They trimmed the fat. So Bloodthirst, bestie, you're a banger. You're a banger. So, Yeah. I think that she's S tier, bestie. I think that she's S tier.
She's got a point. She's an icon. She's a legend. And she is the moment. Now, come on now.
And I'm also going to throw in Gore Obsessed with her because Gore Obsessed is just solid. Great follow-up to Bloodthirst. It's not as strong, in my opinion. It's not as strong, but it's such a vibe change. And I mentioned this in my video that Bloodthirst is this kind of bright and angry album. It's very aggressive, whereas Gore Obsessed has a little bit more pain, a little bit more like licking my wounds, you know. There's a little bit more emotion there. And so it's a nice vibe change. There's a little bit more emotion there, but it's still aggressive and it's still a vibe. And I really enjoy it. Next, let's get into the Wretched Spawn. This is from 2004. Now, I was very surprised to hear a lot of you on my Cannibal Corpse Part 2 video say that the Wretched Spawn was one of your favorite albums, because I don't like this album. I don't like this album at all. This, bar none, next to one other album, is the weakest album for me, to where if I had a choice to listen to any of the other albums in their discography, I would. This would be the last record that I would pick up to listen to. It's just, it didn't hit me in places that I wanted to be hit. And honestly, I think for me personally, the biggest thing that was turning me off was just how cringe a lot of it was, for me personally. I didn't think that Corpse Grinder's vocals were very good. There was just not a lot of bangers for me personally on this record. It fell pretty dang flat, and I don't know if I was expecting a lot either coming out of Gore Obsessed, because I loved Bloodthirst and Gore Obsessed so much. I was expecting the Wretched Spawn to kind of either flop completely or just not meet my expectations, and unfortunately it kind of flopped for me. So the Wretched Spawn, yeah, it's in D tier. Now again, because it's in D tier, it means it's just gonna be a record that I don't usually go back to. Like, all of them are pretty solid. Like, Cannibal Corpse through and through is a campy death metal band for me. They're my favorite death metal band, one of them, really. So I mean, it's like watching a campy horror movie. So this is just kind of like the worst one in the series for me. And you know what, that's fine, because you know, they redeemed themselves with Kill. Now, a lot of people don't seem to really like this album. maybe they do. But Kill, for me personally, not only am I obsessed with the beautiful baby pink vinyl color of that record, but this was a very solid turnaround. This was a very solid record. It was very aggressive. And it was just kind of a standard run-of-the-mill Cannibal Corpse album where you really just can't go wrong. Cannibal Corpse is one of those death metal bands where they've created this pocket for themselves, and they really only diversify in certain elements of their songs, which it's very obvious when you talk about it, but it's very minor changes when you're actually listening to the music. So these are things like adding a certain type of breakdown, or changing the beat and having things be a little bit more technical, or changing the actual tone and effects that you may have with your solos, that type of thing. So again, it sounds very straightforward when you're talking about it, but when you're actually listening to the record and you're a big fan of Cannibal Corpse, you know that they've got this pocket. Most of the Cannibal Corpse records sound the same, but they also don't, minor diversity, which is fine. So Kill, I think, is a very solid, standard, in the pocket Cannibal Corpse record that also, very biasly, has a gorgeous pink vinyl. So Kill, I think you're A tier. You're right up there with Butchered at Birth and Tomb of the Mutilated. She's a solid girl, Now, following this, we get Evisceration Plague. Now, Evisceration Plague, I think, again, is a solid, in-the-pocket Cannibal Corpse record. They're not necessarily breaking any boundaries, but it's punchy, it's aggressive. I hate the album cover. It's not for me, but I didn't have the vinyl for this. Did not have the vinyl for this. It's the only one we're missing in the collection. I do have the HHR cassette, though. I did show that in my video, so I do believe that that's still up for grabs on HHR if you want to grab it. But Evisceration Plague, again, I think is a pretty standard Cannibal Corpse album. I mean, I would definitely listen to Kill or Evisceration Plague more than I would the Wretched Spawn. So Evisceration, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna put you, we're gonna put you in B tier. I think you're not, as good as Kill, but I think you're pretty solid. And you know what? Nah. Yeah, that feels better. I think I'm gonna, keep it in A tier. And you know what? Torture. My girl. Peaked at number 38 on the charts. We love Torture. We love her. I love this album. It's a banger through and through. This is where, Cannibal Corpse starts to get a little bit more mainstream with their sound, and for people that don't agree with them being mainstream, I bet you, bestie, Torture and Skeletal Domain are as mainstream as they come based on the numbers, based on them charting, and that's fine. That's a good thing. Cannibal Corpse can't help that, and I think that that's a huge achievement, especially given the fact that Cannibal Corpse is as gory as they are. Torture is definitely in the pocket when it comes to instrumentation, when it comes to the vibe. These songs are catchy, they're brutal. I personally, I think it's S tier. I really, really do. I fell in love with this album, and I honestly thought it was a banger. And I'm gonna just tell you right now, Skeletal Domain might be one of the most underrated albums, in my opinion, for a Corpse Grinder album. This album, bar none, S tier. Bar none, S tier. A Skeletal Domain charted at number 32, whether you care about that or not. I think it's awesome. I think it's a great achievement for them. But you can tell and you can see why. Like, everything about this album is so good. It sounds like a concept album. It listens like there's a story being told. I mean, everything from the title track to High Velocity Impact Spatter, Sadistic Embodiment, Killer Become. These are songs that are talking about literally what's happening on the album cover, which I just think is so freaking cool. It reminds me of something out of like Lord of the Rings with, the tree people. It's a banger through and through. This is such a solid album with this super creepy atmosphere that they're playing around with, and I just love it. It is one of their catchiest albums. It's perfection. Skeletal Domain, you absolutely won my heart for sure. And then they follow it up with Red Before Black in 2017. Now this album was not as good as A Skeletal Domain, but that is okay because I still think that it was pretty solid. I think again it's in that pocket of Cannibal Corpse. It's in the same pocket as like Kill and Evisceration Plague, in my opinion. I think it's still pretty solid. They're kind of still experimenting with that mainstream wave of music, but it's just not as strong as Skeletal Domain. And then we get into their 2021 album, Violence Unimagined. Now, it was really cool because I feel like a lot of people actually got into Cannibal Corpse from this record, and I could see why. This album is a banger, and I mentioned in part 2 Ritual Annihilation. I love that song. It's so good. It's so good. This record, however, does have a few weak tracks in it, a little bit of filler on B-side. It's really like the last 3 songs. Slowly Sawn, Over Torture, Cerements of the Flay, just, it didn't hit me where I wanted to be hit. Like I mentioned in my part 2 video, that could just be because Ritual Annihilation had already played. But regardless, I am absolutely in love with that song, and I think that it's still catchy and punchy. It's in the pocket for sure. I will admit, it's not a perfect record, and that's okay, So I still think Violence Unimagined is in A tier just because it's got some filler. It's not like in the super. I would really just be listening to Ritual Annihilation and then hopping off and going to another record. I would be going to Skeletal Domain, and I'd be going to Torture, because I really connected with that one song. It's just like Solastalgia was Terracite, that's how I feel. So now we are closing out with their most recent record from 2023, Chaos Horrific. Now this is an album that I will say right now is one of the more disappointing albums in their entire discography. This is right up or down there with the Wretched Spawn. I did not like this album. After going through all of their records, after really doing my research and listening to everything, this album falls super, super flat. Even the title track and their single Bloodblind, it doesn't have the punch that I'm really looking for. And originally when I listened to this record, I noticed that. So at the time, that's why I said it was kind of this like standard run-of-the-mill Cannibal Corpse album, but they didn't really branch out or diversify, and I still think that that's true, but this is definitely a very weak project. Like, you can tell when a standard, in-the-pocket, campy, Cannibal Corpse record is a really good version of that. For example, Kill, you could put Evisceration Plague in there, Red Before Black, you can put that in there. But Chaos Horrific is kind of, it's a flop. She's a bit of a flop. So, especially coming out of like Violence Unimagined, in my opinion. So, I just think Chaos Horrific is in D tier. I don't see myself like listening to this often, honestly. Like, I could put it on and like vibe to it and have a fun time, but Skeletal Domain is right there. Butch at Birth is right there. So that is my tier list for all of the Cannibal Corpse albums, including the Barnes era stuff and Corpse Grinder, all together in one. Was there anything that really surprised you? Anything that shocked you? Where would you put these albums? Would you put anything else in a different tier? Let me know down below. And like always, this is just my opinion. Okay? Go watch my Cannibal Corpse Part 1 and Part 2 series, because I spent a long time on those albums, and I spent a ton of time listening to these records, really diving into them, and I showed off all the vinyls and cassettes that I have for them, except for Evisceration Plague, because they won't freaking repress them, girl. So I had fun doing it, and I had fun doing this video. So I know some of y'all are going to be salty, and that's fine, but just be respectful. Like, come on, you don't need to be a douche, okay? Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, you guys.